Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to another Insights from Women Leaders event. My name is Rola Kaakeh, for those that don't know me. I'm the CEO of Salus Vitae Group, and I'll be the host for the event. Now, for those that are joining us again, welcome. We hope that you've enjoyed one or all of the events that you have attended thus far, and you're definitely in for a treat today. Now, for those that are new to the series, welcome. I wanted to provide you a little background on the Insights from Women Leaders series. Now, we launched this series in October of 2020 as a platform to hear from women leaders with varied backgrounds and experiences on the topics of leadership, addressing current and future challenges, what skills we need moving forward, and how their experiences have shaped their outlook. The goal is to learn from women thought leaders and decision makers to empower current and future leaders, both men and women, to positively impact their organizations and communities. Now, diversity of thought, experiences, industries, education, and training is important to us, as it highlights the mosaic of perspectives that are represented in different settings that drive decision-making and positive change. Now, our guests have included leaders from various prestigious and reputable institutions from across the globe. Their backgrounds are diverse, their accomplishments many, and their insights and perspectives provided have been extremely valuable. I encourage everyone to check out the recordings of our previous guest leaders if you haven't already done so. Now, over the course of an hour, we ask our guest leader a number of questions. I will start, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. So please submit any questions that you may have in the Q&A box. You can also submit them in the chat, but we tend to look at the Q&A box first. Okay, sorry, I think that just moved my screen a bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Now we're going all the way from Chicago to Australia today, and we are very pleased to introduce and welcome our guest leader today, Dr. Tina Brock. Dr. Brock is Professor of Pharmacy Education and Practice in the Faculty of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences at Monash University in Australia, where she leads the team implementing an innovative approach to pharmacy training. She has previously served as the Associate Dean for Global Health and Educational Initiatives at the University of California, San Francisco School of Pharmacy, as the Director of Capacity Building and Performance Improvement at Management Sciences for Health, the co-course director for the Masters in International Practice and Policy at the University College of London, and the Director of Student Services at the University of North Carolina School of Pharmacy. She is a fellow of the International Pharmaceutical Federation and the American Pharmacists Association Academy of Pharmaceutical Research and Science. Tina's key areas of expertise are educational design, global health capacity building, leadership development, interprofessional models, and good tomatoes. I like that addition. She's a storyteller and likes getting people excited about the things that she is excited about. Welcome, and thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Rola. I'm really excited to be here, and it's multiple times of the day all over the world, but it's really nice for me to see in the attendees people from each of those places where I've worked before. So it's nice to have some friends and people who were former students and now are peer mentors of mine. And just good morning. Good morning from Australia. The sun's just starting to come up, so my room will get a little bit lighter as we go along. And thank you for inviting me to be with you today.
Absolute pleasure. Yeah. So when we were mentioned before that we're going to start with the future in mind, you are in the literal future compared to us, at least here in Chicago. So that's going to be fun. So what we're going to do, as we had mentioned before, and as people that have returned to these series know, we ask very similar questions to our various guest leaders, and we always start with the same question, especially as we've talked about your background, and that is looking through and even listening and thinking through everything that you've done. Did you expect to be where you are today?
That's a very interesting question. I did not expect to be where I am today because I am originally from the American South. I'm from Mississippi, and I probably would never have thought I would be an academic, or definitely not working in Australia or having worked all over the world. That said, I want to be very careful that women hear this. I've always been a hard worker. I'm not surprised that that hard work has paid off in my career at all. I don't want, sometimes we can feel while I'm very honored to be where I am, I do think that, I have contributed to the achievements that I've made. It's just probably my mindset was not one as a, strong student in a public school in Southwest Mississippi to think that the world was my oyster at that time, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like the distinction that you're making with regards to maybe where you are in the world, or, you knew that your hard work will take you into different spaces to be successful, or we'll talk about what success means later, but in those various different areas. But sometimes we think of where we are, sometimes even physically where we are in the world, but that's great. So like we mentioned before, we're going to spend a little bit of time in the future. And then it will kind of come back and talk about some of the cool and exciting things you're working on, or the different challenges that we want to address. And then we'll talk about leadership. So when we think about the future, when you think about the future, what is in your future? What do you want your legacy to be?
That's really a great question. And I'm going to try not to say that to every question, but that's a great question for me personally, because I don't know. My future is both scary and exciting because I'm embarking upon a change over the next few months. I've been in Australia working with the most amazing team on a transformative pharmacy education project for about 5 years now. And I could not be prouder of the work that we've done together. We've changed how we work, we've changed how we teach, we changed how we support each other, and we've changed, how we contribute to educational science. And we've done that together as a team. And we've really brought a spirit of social accountability to our pharmacy education course. And I think that's a very important step forward. But like my Twitter bio says, I'm a global honeybee. And my job is to buzz around, or the way I see my job is to buzz around and pollinate different projects that improve care. And the way that I improve care is working through the transformative power of education. So this flower has blossomed, and it now has a really strong team behind it that will take it to the next steps. And now I have to figure out where I'm going to go next and what that challenge will look like for me. So that's my future is a little bit uncertain. And like I said, that's scary and exciting. Some days it's more scary and less exciting. Some days it's more exciting and less scary. But for my legacy, I really don't have that quite nailed down, but I do know that, back to the global honeybee, each bee, the honey that the honeybee produces is influenced by the nectar of the various flowers that it draws its nectar from. And so I hope that I've brought something to this position that, also includes the nectar from University of North Carolina and UCSF and University College London and Management Sciences for Health. And so, what I'm hoping is the sweetness of what we produce together has the influences of all those places.
So then when you look at your past and maybe present experiences, how have they shaped your outlook? You're saying, you started out saying that it's exciting and it's kind of scary that maybe you're uncertain about the future, but have you always felt that was something that you kind of embodied throughout your career, and you were just open to these opportunities and you had that bigger idea of trying to influence in different areas? Or has that kind of changed throughout your journeys?
I think it's changed. I will say, so I've been fortunate to, I don't really know why. I call it the advantages of country living. I grew up in a small town with a small community. Pharmacists in my community tended to be like the community leaders, like they might be the mayor of the town, or they were on the city council, and and that was really what drew me to pharmacy in the first place. I was like, wow, pharmacists are important people who are really invested in their community. Now, again, as I said, I didn't see what my trajectory would look like. And people say, you've moved around a bit. How have you managed that? The hardest move I ever made was from Mississippi to North Carolina. because I didn't know a single person there, and I was going from a practice position to an academic position. I had never done that before. And the first 3 months of that were devastatingly difficult. When I look back, at the time, I just knew it felt like imposter syndrome. It felt like they were going to figure out that they'd hired the wrong person. There was no way I was going to be able to do that job. And it was tough. When I look back, I remember, I'm like, wow, that was really tough for me. Once I went through that transition, I knew that every transition is 3 months of not having a network, not knowing the simplest things like, how do I print something? I mean, these are not necessarily intellectual things, but they're all the things that give us confidence that we know how to do our job. So now, as what I have learned is, as you go into each transition, know there will be 3 months that you'll say, have I made the right decision? Am I doing the right thing? Who can I call? And then you'll start to build your network. You'll start to get your groove. You'll start to, find the photocopier. And so that is what I've learned. I've learned it's always going to be tough for 3 months, and then it should start to get a bit better.
Yeah, I like the idea of embracing that uncertainty. So that's probably stuck with you in terms of accepting that those 3 months or however long there's going to be a learning curve. And I think that allows you to be easier on yourself too.
And to have that self-talk. Now I'll tell myself, if I'm very anxious about it, I'll go, that's just the change bear talking. Don't worry. That's just the change bear. You'll get there.
Yeah. No, I like it. Now, I know this is a conversation that's important to you in terms of the next question. And I think it's one that needs to be had in terms of kind of the realness of people's journeys. And that's usually with failures and challenges. So would you like to share some failures or challenges that you experienced that shaped your outlook or made you do things differently?
Hold on one second. I'm going to cough really loud, so I'm going to mute. Sorry about that. No. You know what? I am, back to my little honeybee analogy. I mean, I have made many, many mistakes. I've chosen flowers that maybe the nectar wasn't as sweet as I thought, or maybe well-intended actions I've taken have taken the wrong way. One thing that I have learned over time is to celebrate those failures. One of the places that I worked at in the past, I can remember saying, I think what just absolutely paralyzes people is that fear of failure. In the industry in which I work, it's all high achieving people. And so when you're surrounded by high achieving people, the smallest failure can seem very amplified. So working with a colleague of mine, Dr. Tana Woolidge at WHO, we were talking about having these failure fairs where you just sort of put on display the things that haven't worked, and you talk through that, right? Because just like in publication, there's a bias towards things that work when some of the most valuable lessons are the things that didn't work and why. And I can remember talking at this institution about we should have a failure fair and we're going to put up posters of all the things. And literally, like, somebody's like, nobody's going to want to do that. Nobody wants to tell people their failures. And I really took that challenge internally, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to share my failures, because if you don't share your failures, others think that your life has been one unending series of green lights, and that's absolutely not true. So I would say probably the biggest failure, and I repeat this mistake, even though I try very hard not to, is I'm very attracted to a vision. So this, Daniel Pink, autonomy, mastery, purpose. I'm really attracted to purpose. If I think that what I'm going to do helps more than just me, I'm going to work really hard at it. But you really have to understand your organization's tolerance for ambiguity. And like, I'm going to use a probably a very feminine example is it's like going into your hairdresser and saying, I want something brand new. I want something totally different. And they're like, okay. And then you say, but only take a 1/4 inch off. So, you know, how much change you expect for totally different, transformative. These are words that are now used a lot, but maybe that's not where every place is. So my biggest mistake is sometimes I misread the room. I misread what the leadership defines as success. And these don't always have to be big failures, but they can be things that influence the trajectory of whatever project that you're working on.
Yeah, that's fair. I really like that. So the next question, more pertains, we're going to continue with kind of the theme of the future, because you did mention that the future does excite you. So what excites you about the future?
I actually think, and you know, this is as I'm going into, you know, approaching my mid-50s now, what I really see that my job, and I've worked hard to get to where I am, but I see behind me just a tribe, a hive, back to the honeybees, a hive of young women leaders, scientists, practitioners, academics, change agents who are just looking for that space. And I see what I would like for my future role to be is, you know, amplifying their voice. So when I get to the table, I'm not speaking for them. They have their own voice, but this is a chance for me to make some room at that table, or to slow the conversation down to make sure that their voice is being noticed. And that's what really gets excited. There's so many things. I was, when I was younger, you know, you asked me if I saw my future. I was pretty rule abiding. Like if a teacher said, read this, I probably read it. If somebody said, do this, you know, I wasn't bullshit enough to think about, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Is this the right thing to do? I love that this generation is questioning those things, and, you know, having that space to think about things differently, especially the constructs that are man-made or are human-made, that, you know, this is infrastructure and definitions of success that we have set. How can these be changed? So things like, you know, now I'm learning so much from mentees who are now peer mentees, somebody like Dr. Vibhuti Arya at St. John's, about equity and justice. These were not things that I think I wouldn't have ignored. I didn't even think about this as a conversation. You know, this can really, you know, taking that inspiration for the next generation, climate change, and really giving them giving them space to speak their truth. I think that's what's exciting to me about the future. They won't tolerate the things that my generation tolerated. Yeah.
The being able to question things in a healthy way, a constructive way, to be able to make a change, I think is very powerful and exciting.
Yeah, we talk about sort of this inquiry stream that we have in our courses, answering questions, but questioning answers. And I think answering questions has sort of always been part of our scientific, you know, approach, but questioning answers, that's probably much more powerful.
Yeah, I like that. So now as we look towards the future, many of us here like to think about different tools or skills that we need to think to build and constantly work on. So what do you think we need moving forward?
One of the things that I became interested in as I moved around is systems science and organizational behavior science. And these are things that I'm not formally trained in, like I don't have a degree in those areas, but it's certainly something that over the last decade, I have invested a lot of time in studying and following these economists, psychologists, you know, amazing people like Angela Duckworth or, you know, Adam Grant and many others, Danny Kahneman. You know, these are people that I think the world is much smaller than it once was. When I studied abroad, when I was an undergraduate, I had this phone card, and once a week I could make a call. It had like 100 numbers that I had to punch in quickly, and you couldn't see the person. Now we can, you can talk to me in Chicago and I can be in Australia, and our hive can be a global hive. But understanding that culture, those systems, how organizational behavior and change works are definitely skills that I think, we need to recognize that we might be traditionally trained in biological sciences or chemistry or even clinical sciences, but these are the things that influence how effective our change and how we evaluate that change is. And so those are skills I think that we all need to be developing. Yeah. As leaders.
No, that's powerful too, because it makes us also look beyond ourselves in terms of the actual organizations and structures that we can also influence as individuals, but ultimately have bigger long-term effects as well, and ripple effects across multiple systems and organizations. So
back to that honeybee, getting that hive together, getting your hive to work together effectively to influence that change, I think is really powerful.
Yes. Yeah, agreed. Now let's come to the present. Are there any current initiatives that you're working on that you're most excited about or that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. As I mentioned, the project that I work at Monash, it's not over. There will continue to be change associated with it. But one of the things that I'm working hard on now is that formal evaluation of what we've done, what worked, what hasn't worked, sharing that widely. So we've done a lot of work in the interprofessional space, which was a new area for us, and looking at the role perhaps pharmacy students and trainees can play in influencing the care model. So we have our students out doing these quality improvement projects, and I'm really keen on that. I'm also really keen to make sure, as I'm transitioning out, to help support the team in that transition. They will take this course and this project and this educational initiative into new space that they own, that has their shared vision, but I want to do what I can to support them. And then again, I'm trying to really challenge myself as I'm looking forward, and this a little bit back to the future, but as I look for what next for me is to hold myself accountable to push my boundaries a little bit. I think the pandemic has been terrible, but it's also taught us a lot about our definitions of how learning works, and what things that we can influence. And I want to make sure that we don't let the pain we've experienced over the past year and a half go to waste. When I hear people say, I can't wait for things to go back to normal, I want to say, I can't wait to see my family. I can't wait to, have students in the classroom, but we shouldn't go back to the way things were, because they were actually broken. The pandemic amplified where those gaps were. So let's make it better than it was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. So that actually is a great transition to our next question about obstacles and challenges that keep you up at night. It could be the pandemic, but like you mentioned, now there were several gaps prior to the pandemic.
So probably the thing that most keeps me up, I worry about my family, and that keeps me up at night. But professionally, what keeps me up at night is really thinking about, as I said, about these human-made obstacles that will influence maybe all junior academics, but particularly women, people of color, more marginalized populations that were already marginalized. And how has this pandemic actually closed doors for them? So there, as we were talking a little bit earlier, there's some things that we absolutely can't, we have to accept. Gravity exists. We must walk on the ground. I'm probably not, or at least until Elon Musk makes it where we don't have to walk on the ground anymore. But, I'm not so bold as to think that we can change that. But some of the metrics by which we evaluate ourselves, we created those metrics. And so when I hear we're going to leave people behind, we're going to, I'm thinking we don't have to do that. We can change our expectations now that we really understand the construct with which we're working. And that really does keep me up at night. There's a group here at Monash, back to my present, called Her Research Matters. And these are mainly early mid-career women scientists, researchers, and teachers. And they have absolutely, changed the way I think about this. I think I might have thought I was working hard for them until I saw how much harder. It's going to be hard to be successful. It always is. It shouldn't be harder. Mm-hmm. And so I'm pretty keen to let's change let's change this infrastructure. Let's change these metrics. Let's redefine what success looks like to allow these smart, passionate, talented people to be in a situation that they can thrive. I was on a conversation this week, 3 different conversations with young academics at 3 different universities all over the world. Each of these 3 people, who I think is outstanding, bright, has so much to offer. Each of them says, I'm thinking about making a change. I just don't think I can do this anymore. And I was horrified that the next generation of students won't have these people to guide them because they think they're not good enough, or they think they just can't make it in this environment. And I want to use my voice to amplify theirs and to make change possible. And I think if the great institutions of the world will make those changes, other people will say, hey, it's okay. It is okay to redefine this.
Yeah. I think we had talked about this earlier, but that's to the great point of having these metrics that are also sometimes so unrealistic, right? So the metric of success that is just sometimes impossible for people to achieve. So then you always feel like you are quote unquote unsuccessful or haven't met that. But do you have your own definition of success, and has that been consistent, or has that evolved because you've questioned kind of these metrics? So give us your take on this whole defining success.
I think that, that is, everyone needs their definition and, sort of their true north but one that's I've been influenced by fairly recently in the last couple of years. Sorry, I do have COVID brain, and my time span over the last year is not actually correct, I'm sure. But Malcolm Gladwell, I think he defined success as sort of being able to do what you want to do. And I was like, wow, that is it. Success for me is being able to do what I want to do 83% of the time. I'm not unrealistic. I know sometimes you can't do everything that you want to do, but I'm like, if I can basically own 83% of my day, 83% of my week, 80% of my month or year, then that's successful. Because quite frankly, the world is not a fair place. And what working globally has taught me is I have worked extremely hard, but there are people out there just as smart as I am, just as hardworking as I am, but the infrastructure in which they're working didn't facilitate their growth, and they are having to work harder at that. So that's the way I like people to think about, inside, what would you want to do today, and can you mostly do those things? That's my definition of success, influenced by Malcolm Gladwell.
I think I heard that recently too, about being able to do what you want as kind of that freedom, becoming that measure of success, and kind of people thriving in that space, because then they identify their purpose and like they merge that with kind of, and then where their own skills and gifts are. And so there's kind of that building. But like you said, nothing is always 100% in terms of always doing what it is. But You also bring up another excellent point. It's just that there is the individual that is thinking about success and working towards the success, and then there is the environment in which that individual is. So given that you've been in so many different types of environments, and like you mentioned, sometimes within communities in certain areas, it doesn't even have to be a very different country. There's so many different types of disparities within organizations. But how do you begin? Is there something that you think about in terms of creating your own environment for success, whether it be working with your teams or various institutions?
I said it again. I said I wasn't going to say, great question. That is something that keeps me up at night too. When I think about, how, for example, I'm going to use an academic example, but there are also examples of this in healthcare practice as well, which is things like rankings. Rankings are very important. Our reputation, this is where our research is, this is where how many publications that we've had, this is the grants we've won, these are the students we've graduated and what they're doing. And those are very traditional definitions of success. But what if we added to that definition, how well is your team thriving? We spend a lot of time picking the people on the team. In the academic setting, there's a lot of presentations and reviews. And what if it's, that's a very expensive use of your time, right? To pick people for your team. So if you think that you've got the right people on your team, what if that definition of success is how have they thrived? And I would love to bring that to the educational arena, the academic arena, and even on the student side as well, or the learner side, whether these are, early students or later students, lifelong learners, I guess, is how well are people thriving as your new definition of my organization is successful because my people are thriving. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh. Because you're looking at then when you're thinking about that, as you're saying it, then you begin to start thinking about the actual journey, the actual experience within that team or in the organization, rather than the initial point of hiring to all the way to the outcome, which is often the success metrics that individual or that team is measured on. Whereas thriving is kind of understanding how they're moving within that experience or that team and how they're building themselves in their team. And I think it allows you to look at that very differently. And it sounds more enjoyable too, right? Like I will actually be thriving and growing within.
And Rola, that is exactly it. Like I have actually seen people hit their traditional success metrics, right? They got the Nature paper, the JAMA article, the grant, they had a great teaching experience, but there's no joy in it for them. Mm-hmm. Because at what cost did they mm-hmm. achieve that? And I do not believe that that's sustainable. I think that is and it sets a terrible example worldwide. If people are looking to you as an example, if you're at one of these places, if you're fortunate enough to be at one of these places that people look up to, and there's no joy, there's no joy in the hive's not healthy. Yeah. I would accept a different standard for traditional success to keep that hive healthy, working together, thriving, and supporting one another.
Well, we can't talk about thriving without talking about, and like you actually just said right now, in terms of supporting one another and asking for support. So this is a conversation we tend to try to have a lot in terms of approaches to take to ask for support when needed, because some people tend to think that support is a sign of weakness or that they're too mm-hmm. shy, thinking that if they ask for support, it just means that they can't do their job like they had promised. So what recommendations do you have for asking for support? Is this something that you value? Do you do often? What's your take on that?
So I would say, and again, this is some advantages of growing up in a small place, in a small town where we it really was a community. If something bad is happening in your family, somebody's going to show up at your door with a pie or a casserole or, and I feel like the thing that I would share with people is I have a coach. I've had a coach for the last at least decade, 12 years, at least a dozen years, different coaches along the way. But I have no problem now when I go into a new environment saying the first thing I need to be successful is a coach. And in some cases, my institution has sponsored that coaching. In some cases, I have paid for that myself. And I've been very fortunate that I should say that. I'm very grateful to my institutions for sponsoring that. But having a coach gives me that professional, in a way, professional therapy, but somebody who's not, I don't report to, or who doesn't report to me, that I can work through some of this organizational behavior and change, role play. I have found that to be absolutely transformative for me. Now, the first time I had a coach, I can remember talking to a colleague who said, ugh, like, I think they thought having a coach was like being performance managed. Like you would get a coach if something was wrong with you. And I was like, oh, I see it as you get to have a coach so that things can be right. And they're all, actually, I've never had a coach, even before the pandemic, that I met with face to face. It's almost always been virtual. And now I think there are even organizations that you can appeal to have a coach, and you can, set the standard, do you want to meet frequently or infrequently, or do you want to go with a challenge and try to work through it? Or do you want to basically just develop your baseline skill set? I'm sorry. I wonder if my hair is making a lot of noise. I'm on my microphone. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, but that is something that I would like practice asking for that every day, asking yourself permission. And sometimes that's the hardest person to ask. Asking your supervisor, connecting with your hive and saying, hey guys, getting somebody who can be your guide on the side or your coach in the computer, whatever that takes, is an investment in yourself. If you had bad allergies, you would take a nasal steroid this is that helping you to grow and develop and prevent allergy symptoms from developing, preventing leadership, challenges. So that would be my advice about asking for support.
I like it. And I love the point that you made about giving yourself permission.
Yes.
To do that too as well. And I think that sometimes we get in the way of ourselves for some types of things. So now I do want to talk about leadership, because that is a big topic. And so we asked you, what are some top 2 skills, or how you would define maybe success in a leader, or that every leader needs to be successful? And you said, success is in the eye of the beholder. Sometimes I have to remind myself that I have the power to define myself as the beholder in this sentence. I've been fortunate to work in a lot of different types of environments. Necessary leadership skills were common despite this are tolerance of ambiguity, which I think we've said a lot, and the vision to see complex change as a system, which are I think the 2 really big themes we've had thus far. Is there anything that you wanted to elaborate further on this?
Yeah, I mean, just back to giving yourself, permission to you define what success is like for you. And it might look very different between people, and that's okay. That's okay. Going back to, if you're mostly able to do what you want to do, then it doesn't matter if the person next to you would, what they want to do is different from you. I think that not underestimating, it took me a while to learn this. I mean, I hear what I want to hear. I'm basically an optimist, and I'm going to find the positivity. I'm going to find the beautiful flower, that's blossoming. But understanding that even something that seems relatively simple to change has a lot of emotion, has a lot of, how people feel about their identity can really influence how the success of an initiative. Early in my career, I would say, my husband would laugh. He'd say, you just lead every conversation. You meet somebody new, you're like, hi, I'm Tina, and I'm a pharmacist, and he's like, he's a medical photographer, and that might not come up for the first 72 hours that you talk to him. now, maybe about 15 years into my career, I sort of shifted my identity to, hi, I'm Tina and I'm a teacher. But recognizing that, what a teacher has changed, that role, and people will struggle with that identity change. What a practitioner is changing.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to give people space to work through that complex change. And the leader's guide is to create that space, to create the conversation, to prompt, to nudge, but to shepherd people at the pace maybe slightly comfortable than they feel, but slightly faster than they feel comfortable, but just faster.
Mm-hmm.
There's an educational term called the zone of proximal development. And it's your stretch goal, but it's not like, if you ask me if I could run a marathon, I would be like, no. And if you ask me if I could run a half marathon, I would probably say no. If you ask me if I can run a mile, I think I can do that. And maybe the next day I can run a mile and a little more and a little more and a little more. So breaking that complex change down, I think, is a really positive way of seeing for a leader to guide people through change.
Now, our audience members are vary in their experience and kind of level post graduate school. So some are students, some are top executives. So we have a wide range there. Are there any specific leadership advice you would give? It could be different to those at different stages of their career, or are there overall leadership advice that you live by?
That has definitely changed over time. I think when I started as a student, and I was a student leader, I was involved, I definitely thought leadership came through formal structure, like being the president of the student body or the president of a group. And I think, quite frankly, when I was growing up, I didn't have a lot of formal women leadership role models, because there weren't a lot of women in those formal roles. Now, when I actually dig in and think about it, I was like, oh, I had lots of women that I admired and that I respected and that I saw making the world a better place. But they weren't the president of the organization, and they weren't the dean, and they weren't. And so, understanding that there's a great John Milton, the poet, on his blindness. The last line is something like, those also serve who only stand and wait. And it just made me realize how important that leadership spirit is, whether you're in a formal role or not. Now, we are seeing this change, and you're seeing more women not just get into the bottom rung, but we're starting to edge up the ladder. More should happen. But I would say to emerging leaders, look for a space that you can find your autonomy, have some choice, mastery, get better at it, and purpose. Find your greater good and use that to feed your intrinsic motivation, and to develop as a leader with or without those formal structures.
And are there specific kinds of leaders, when someone was to tell you, is there a certain type or a certain quality that I should have as a leader? What would you say to that?
That's real. It's not a great question at all, Rola. I can't believe you asked me that. I had the pleasure of writing a book chapter about pharmacy leadership fairly recently, and the lead author was an emerging leader, somebody sort of earlier in the career, and I was the senior author. And along the author list was basically a stair step of people. And, we really dug into all the different types of leadership, servant leadership, transformative leadership, hierarchical leadership. And, what we found is you can sort of find elements of what you need in all of them, depending upon the situation at hand. So, for example, if you're in a situation like a pandemic and you need to quickly get out millions of vaccines, you might actually need a hierarchical structure to do that efficiently. Now, not forever, but in the acute phase, you need to, get injections into arms. As you look at building sustainability of a model, you're going to need to bring others along in a different way. And so I would just say, read. I encourage people to, maybe you can't all study leadership deeply, but do learn about it. Whether that's through inspiring TED Talks or reading Atul Gawande's pieces in the New Yorker, or, find a space where, and challenge yourself. One of the things I try to do is make sure that if everybody around me in the room, and I think we've talked about this before, Rola, agrees with me, I get very worried, because I think this is not going to go anywhere. These people don't feel comfortable enough to dissent. So if people feel comfortable enough to say, I see it another way, or we might be making a mistake because I see that as a success. I think that's a healthy team. And so teaching yourself that pushback, respectful pushback, obviously, I don't know, challenge, dissent is actually part of strength. It's not weakness. That would be another part of leadership study that I would advise people.
Like that.
I avoided the question.
I think you definitely provided in terms of, I think we often always try to think that there's one solution or one specific method or type of leader. And the point really is that there's a diversity of different types, and you're going to be a different type of leader given different situations. And so I think understanding those, and like you mentioned, educating yourself on the different types and when it makes sense and when it doesn't, and then make sure that you read the room, like we talked about before, in terms of your teams and understanding what works for that situation as well. It's not that it's always going to be, really easy and everyone is agreeing, doesn't mean that it's all going to go well. So I think those are really valid points with regards to self-reflecting on the idea of what leadership skills we need and how that changes over time. Now, we do have several questions in the Q&A, but I do want to make sure to get to this last question before we start addressing some of the audience questions. Now, we would like to take this opportunity to support one another and recognize the positive influence we have on one another. Can you name a woman who has inspired you, and why did you choose this person?
I have so many women that actually inspire me from a lot of different fields. And I do choose my, inspiration, people like Dolly Parton for what she's done for her community and her family, and the donation to the Moderna vaccine, Oprah Winfrey, a Mississippian who I'm very inspired by. But the person that I chose is somebody who she may remember me from our time together, but our relationship was formally informal, and that's Sue Desmond-Hellman. When I went to UCSF, she was the chancellor of our university. She's a physician by training. Her dad was a pharmacist, which always makes it a little bit special. But she came from a field, she'd been working in global healthcare and in the pharmaceutical industry, came into an academic role. She stayed in that role for 5 years, led us through a tremendous change. She invested a lot in leadership development, and people like me who were sort of new to that university leadership table. So she brought in people, we were in Silicon Valley, so she was able to bring in speakers from LinkedIn and Sheryl Sandberg and, just amazing community leaders. And when she saw that job was done, her role at UCSF was done in about 5 years, she went on to become the CEO of the Gates Foundation and do another 5 years there. And she's now just retired from that position. But we had some personal interaction that I found very motivating, but it was really watching her navigate change and not feeling constrained by the traditional sense of you must stay in one field. You must, if you're in pharma, you're in pharma. If you're in academia, you're in academia. If you're working at a, very influential NGO, you have to stay in that you can pick and choose across that and invest in the people that you see And I would say her purpose stayed the same. It was bringing healthcare worldwide, right? And, so I continue to follow her and be influenced by her today.
Okay, so now we're just going to open it up to some questions. So we received some questions in the chat and in the Q&A box. So the one that we received in the chat states, what do you think is your legacy for the pharmacy profession in your time in Australia? And what do you hope will change to meet your vision for the future of pharmacists around the world? With a little B in world.
That's a great question. And the person who's asking that question is an amazing leader, well recognized in Australia for what she's contributed. So I am humbled that she's chosen to ask me. I would say, one of the reasons I wanted to come to Australia was the size. So it's fairly big landmass, but not so many people. And it was really at an emerging, there were so many things happening with advanced practice, with even the way community pharmacy is regulated, which I just thought this is an incredible time to work with a great team. And if anybody can do it, this Australian community of pharmacists can do that. I'm going to cough really loud. Hold on. Thank you. I would say, I hope that my legacy is a bit of seeing each other. We're really fortunate across Australia and New Zealand. There's only about 20 pharmacy schools, and the connections between those. We really don't compete to the same level in the educational space that perhaps schools in other parts of the world do. And I hope that that aggregation and collaboration and using our energies for the greater good could be something that I would leave behind, and redefining success as the teamwork. I have a failure, which is I hoped when I got here 4 to 5 years ago that we would have students and interns in the state that I live, Victoria, being able to vaccinate. Having been through that in both the US and the UK, I was really hoping that. So we haven't quite made it yet. We can prepare vaccine, and that is a step forward. So, I would say that's one of the things that I see as, we almost got there, but not quite. And I think that my future for around the world is having pharmacists feel more comfortable using their voice to amplify effective medication use, and not see it as a turf war with any other profession. Mm-hmm. I just think that's not helpful, but really owning and bringing our expertise and our advocacy to the open arena.
I like it. Now, staying consistent with the bee themes, there's a question that says, speaking of bees, are you able to comment on the queen bee syndrome? So maybe women disadvantaging other women in the workplace, and what would you do in such a situation?
Yeah, that's a great question from another great person who I've had a lot of interaction with in Vitae, Stephanie. It's true. That's why I always define myself as I'm the honeybee. I'm not the queen bee. The queen, there's only one queen in any hive, and their job is to lay a bunch of eggs and to create the honeybees and the drones of the future. And this is well described in the leadership literature of the queen bee is, they don't want anyone else to be the queen. And there has, it is defined these women who pull the ladder up behind them. Now, whether that's conscious or whether they feel like they had to work so hard to get to where they were, that they are afraid if the next generation behind them doesn't have to work that hard, that they won't develop the resilience, the thick skin to be successful at that table. Both have been described. I believe that we will continue to have to work hard, but we shouldn't have to work harder. A queen bee syndrome, it takes a lot of humility to work with. And in some cases, you have to you have to look and say, is this a situation that I can influence or I can change? Or perhaps I might have to exit. I might have to exit the situation, and I can't tell any one person what to do, but you have to be able to read that room and say, am I able to influence the situation? And sometimes just having an open conversation about it. I wouldn't call the queen bee. I wouldn't say, hey, do you know what queen bee syndrome is? Because it sounds like you're one. But you might come to it with I'm curious about what I could do to, we could do to have a positive relationship that allows me to grow and thrive, and you to, continue to grow and thrive as well. So it's sort of getting some experience, perhaps with a coach, of having a brave, potentially awkward conversation about that.
So we do have a question too now with regards to careers in education. So what advice would you give to those starting their career in education?
That's a great question from Aman, who I know from my time in London. It's great to hear from you, Aman, another rising star. I would say, if you're starting your career in education now, it's a brilliant time, because so much of how we defined education was, this is where you are physically located, this is the chair you're sitting in, and this is how we learn. The pandemic, and I would not have chosen a pandemic to teach us this lesson, in a way will democratize education. And I see some of the initiatives like the WHO Academy of bringing education and training to health workers around the world will absolutely change how we train, even in the formal situations. So if you're starting your career in education now, reach outside of your technical area, and that might be pharmacy, it will be pharmacy for Aman, and connect with others, whether that's in medical education, nursing education, and education, and create that change group that will help keep you ahead of, thinking about not just how do we replicate what currently exists, but how do we change what exists to what should exist. I believe in the transformative power of education, whether that's getting into school in the first place, all the way to staying in school and becoming that lifelong learner. And I think we can do an even better job than we're doing right now. And so there's probably never been a better time to start a career in education.
And I really like how you also recommended talking to to other disciplines within that, as you kind of co-design or think about how education maybe is delivered in other disciplines to create something that we ultimately all want to see in the future and kind of go towards that in that direction. And I think that goes back to your initial points of the power of being able to learn and cross-pollinate across different disciplines or areas. And I think that's what's so exciting about education in general, because those walls have either are now open or gone, or there is room to discuss and see how we can learn from each other and to co-design these educational experiences. So that is wonderful.
So one thing, yes, I was really affected by Amanda Gorman's poem that she read at the U.S. inauguration this year. And I go back and listen to her words over and over again. And I just think that spirit suggests the future is so bright. If we're brave enough to see it that way. But a lot of people quote that last line about being brave enough to be it. But I actually like the line before. It says, when day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. I'm going to get emotional talking about it. But this idea of just, aflame with passion and unafraid to be who we are, to connect, to love who we love, to influence who we influence, and to let that passion drive the decisions that we make and to make our hive healthy.
That's so great. Well, we are about on time, so for the end of our session, I wish this was at least a few more hours, but we're about up now for time. So are there any other closing remarks or final thoughts that you would like to add?
I really would like to give a shout out. I know it's a different time all over the world, but I feel so honored. Like when I see the people who are in the session today, I know almost every one of them, and they mean something to me, and they have made me who I am as a leader. once I got this award, and they put up a photo of me, and I used little bits and pieces of all of these students and mentees and, and peers and collaborators. And I do think that each of the people in your hive changes you for the better. And, I feel really fortunate. I have worked hard for what I've done, but I feel really fortunate that my hive is so global and so special.
So great. Well, on behalf of Salus Vitae Group and myself, I would like to thank you for joining us today and for sharing your experiences. I've absolutely loved the conversation. It's been real. We've gone through the good, the failures, the challenges, but also I think what stayed consistent is the realistic optimism and the need to continuously learn more and cross-pollinate from each other so that we can build the world that we hope to leave for our kids and grandkids and leave our mark in this world. So thank you so much. And for everyone, we have several other exceptional guest leaders in the coming weeks. So please visit our website, salusvitaegroup.com, to learn more and register for the event. Thank you again so much. We're already receiving comments in the Q&A and the chat saying that we love you, Tina, and everyone's giving you a shout out there as well. So thank you so much again for being with us. And if you do post anything on social media, please feel free to tag us at Salus Vitae Group so we can see how you benefited from these sessions. Thank you again, everyone, and we hope to see you at the next event. Thank you so much, Tina.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.